I'm Michael Reed, a numbers guy by trade and a family man by heart, or at least that's what I used to think. I've always been the type to find comfort in stability. You know, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, making sure every line of my family's financial life added up. I thought I was doing everything right, providing for my wife, Sarah, and our two kids, Ethan and Olivia, in the quiet security of our suburban home. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. Ethan, our rambunctious 8-year-old, was always running around, kicking his soccer ball into whatever he could turn into a makeshift goal. Olivia, just 6, was sweet and imaginative, always drawing colorful pictures of the family and taping them to the fridge. And Sarah, well, Sarah had this magnetic quality about her. People were drawn to her like moths to a flame, myself included. But lately, something's been off. It started as little things, barely noticeable at first. Sarah seemed distant, distracted. We'd sit down for dinner, and she'd pick at her food, her gaze lost in some faraway thought. When I asked her what was on her mind, she'd brush it off. Nothing, just tired. I wanted to believe her. After all, being a stay-at-home mom to 2 kids is no easy job, and I figured she just needed a break. Then there were the late nights. I'd go to bed after a long day of work, expecting to feel her familiar warmth beside me. But the other side of the bed would stay empty until well past midnight. She said she was working on a genealogy project, tracing her family's roots. I wanted to be supportive. I even offered to help. But she insisted it was her thing. And honestly, it felt good seeing her so passionate about something. But the more time she spent glued to that laptop, the more uneasy I felt. The tipping point came one evening while I was tucking Ethan and Olivia into bed. Ethan asked for his usual bedtime story, and Olivia begged for a song. That was Sarah's thing, singing the kids to sleep. She had this beautiful voice that could melt the tension out of even the worst days. But she wasn't there to sing that night, or the next. When I finally got downstairs, I saw her in the study, her back to me, her face bathed in the glow of the computer screen. She didn't even notice me come in. I called her name softly, and she jumped, quickly closing whatever she'd been working on. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone light. "You coming to bed soon?" "Yeah, just a little longer," she replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I wanted to brush it off, but something about the way her fingers hovered over the keyboard, like she was protecting a secret, gnawed at me. I didn't sleep well that night. The unease I felt that night didn't fade. It only grew stronger. Sarah and I had been together long enough that I could usually tell when something was bothering her. But this time it wasn't just a bad day or a passing mood. There was something deeper, something she wasn't telling me. The next morning, while I was making coffee, she came into the kitchen and greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. It was a small gesture, but it felt mechanical, like she was checking a box. "You okay?" I asked, handing her a mug. "Yeah, why?" she replied quickly, taking a sip without looking at me. "No reason," I said, forcing myself to let it go. But I couldn't. Later that week, the kids had a soccer game. Sarah usually loved those, cheering from the sidelines, snapping pictures like a proud mom. This time, though, she spent most of the game on her phone, her face lighting up with a smile I hadn't seen in weeks. When I asked her who she was texting, she shrugged it off. "Just someone from the genealogy forum," she said. "Must be a pretty funny forum," I joked, trying to keep my tone light. She didn't respond. That night, after the kids were asleep, I decided to check her laptop. I know it wasn't the most honorable thing to do, but I needed answers. She had left it open on the study desk, so I took a deep breath, sat down, and clicked the browser. It didn't take long to find the chat logs. The name Caleb popped up over and over again. At first glance, their messages seemed innocent enough. Lots of talk about ancestors, historical records, and family trees. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. The messages became personal, intimate even. "You have such a beautiful way of looking at things. Talking to you makes my day so much brighter. Sometimes I wonder if we were meant to find each other." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just about genealogy. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that maybe I was misinterpreting their words, but deep down I knew better. There was a connection between them, something Sarah had chosen to share with this stranger instead of me. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. When Sarah came into the room a few minutes later, I tried to act normal. "You're up late," she said, glancing at the desk. "Just finishing some work," I replied, avoiding her gaze. "Don't stay up too long," she said with a small smile before heading upstairs. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close before I let myself breathe. This wasn't just a rough patch in our marriage. It was something much worse. For the next few days, I lived in a fog. I went through the motions: work, family dinners, bedtime routines, but my mind was constantly racing. I couldn't stop thinking about those messages. I kept asking myself the same questions. Was it really harmless? Or was there more to it? Sarah didn't seem to notice anything was off with me. Or if she did, she didn't say a word. Instead, she stayed glued to her laptop whenever she had a free moment. One night, after we'd put the kids to bed, I decided to test the waters. "You've been spending a lot of time on that genealogy project," I said casually as we sat on the couch. She didn't look up from her screen. "Yeah, it's fascinating. I've uncovered so much about my family history. Must be nice to have someone to help with it," I added, my voice steady even though my chest felt tight. That made her pause. She glanced at me, her expression guarded. "What do you mean?" "I saw the name Caleb in your chat history the other day," I admitted. I wasn't snooping. It just popped up. Her face went pale for a split second before she forced a laugh. "Oh, Caleb? He's just a historian. We've been talking about old records and stuff." "It's nothing." "Nothing?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow, because some of those messages didn't seem like they were about records. Her eyes narrowed, her tone sharpening. "You're reading too much into it, Michael. He's just a friend." Friend. That word hit me like a slap. "Does this friend know you're married?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Of course he does," she snapped. "You're being ridiculous." Ridiculous. That's what she thought of me, her husband, trying to understand why she was spending hours talking to another man. "I'm just saying," I said, standing up. "It feels like you're more interested in talking to him than spending time with your own family." Her mouth tightened, and she closed the laptop with a sharp click. "Maybe if you weren't always so busy with work, you'd notice that I'm here with you every night." The irony of her words stung. She was physically present, sure, but her mind was somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't reach. I didn't push the conversation any further that night. It wasn't worth starting a fight in front of the kids. But as I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing her. I kept replaying the chat messages in my mind, wondering if I had already lost her to someone else. It was Friday morning when Sarah approached me in the kitchen, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder. She'd started carrying it everywhere, even when she didn't need to. "Hey," she said, her tone unusually soft. "I was thinking, maybe I need some time to myself this weekend." I froze mid-sip of my coffee. "Time to yourself?" "Yeah," she said, avoiding my eyes. "I haven't had a break in ages, and I thought I could take a little trip. Just me. Clear my head, you know?" Ethan and Olivia were munching cereal at the table, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. "Where are you planning on going?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Just a little bed and breakfast upstate," she said, fidgeting with her bag strap. "I found it online. It looks peaceful." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "And you'll be going alone?" Her brow furrowed at the question, as if the very idea of my suspicion was offensive. "Yes, Michael. Alone. I just need a break." The old me would have taken her words at face value, chalked it up to stress, and encouraged her to enjoy herself. But after everything I'd seen, I couldn't ignore the knots twisting in my gut. "That's fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Everyone needs some time to recharge." She looked surprised, as if she'd expected me to object. "Thanks," she said softly, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "I'll only be gone a couple of nights. You've got things handled here, right?" Of course, I said. But as soon as she walked out the door, I grabbed my phone and called my best friend, Alex. Alex and I had been friends since college. He was the kind of guy who knew how to keep things light but could be dead serious when it mattered. When I told him about Sarah's solo trip, he didn't hold back. Mike, come on. You really think she's going to a B&B alone? I don't know, I admitted, pacing the kitchen. But I have to find out. I can't sit here and pretend everything's fine. Okay, Alex said, his tone shifting into problem-solving mode. You want me to follow her? I hesitated. Felt invasive, even wrong. But then I thought about Ethan and Olivia, about what this could mean for all of us. Yes, I said finally. I need to know the truth. Alex agreed to tail Sarah that weekend. I stayed home with the kids, trying to act normal while my mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, hoping for an update. It wasn't until late Saturday night that Alex called. I stepped out onto the back porch to take the call, the cool air biting at my skin. Mike, he said, his voice low. You're not going to like this. My stomach dropped. What is it? She's not at a bed and breakfast, he said. She's at a private cabin. And she's not alone. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. With Caleb, I managed to choke out. I don't know his name, Alex said. But she's with a guy. They were at the cabin together when I got here. I saw them on the porch earlier, laughing, hugging. It doesn't look good, man. I gripped the phone tightly, my knuckles turning white. My worst fears weren't just fears anymore. They were reality. Thanks, Alex, I said, my voice hollow. I'll take it from here. Couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah in that cabin, smiling at a man who wasn't me. My mind raced with questions I didn't want answers to, images I didn't want to imagine. When the sun finally crept over the horizon, I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to sit at home and stew in my thoughts. I needed to see it for myself, to confront whatever was happening head-on. I called Alex. Where's the cabin? Mike, are you sure about this? He asked, his tone cautious. Just tell me. He sighed, then gave me the address. It was a 2-hour drive upstate, tucked away in a quiet stretch of forest. I thanked him and hung up, my hands trembling as I packed an overnight bag for the kids to stay with my sister. By the time I arrived, the morning air was crisp, and the gravel driveway leading to the cabin crunched under my tires. My heart pounded in my chest as I parked a short distance away, hidden by a cluster of trees. The cabin was small and rustic, with smoke curling lazily from the chimney. It would have been picturesque under different circumstances, maybe even romantic. But now it felt like a betrayal made tangible. I stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at my face, and approached quietly. I wasn't even sure what I'd do when I got there, but I couldn't turn back. Through the window I saw them. Sarah was sitting on the couch, laughing at something the man beside her had said. He leaned in closer, his hand brushing against hers. She didn't pull away. That was all I needed to see. I knocked on the door, my heart hammering so loudly I could barely hear the echo of my fist against the wood. There was a shuffle of movement inside, and a moment later, Sarah opened the door. The blood drained from her face when she saw me. Michael, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing, I said, my tone colder than I'd intended. She stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind her. Let me explain. Explain what, Sarah? I snapped, cutting her off. That you lied to me? That you're here with another man? Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. That's what I thought, I said, stepping past her and opening the door. The man inside stood up as I entered. He was tall, with neatly combed hair and an air of confidence that made my blood boil. You must be Caleb, I said, my voice dripping with venom. And you must be Michael, he replied, his tone infuriatingly calm. For a moment, I considered punching him, but I held back. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. You need to leave, I said, pointing to the door. He hesitated, glancing at Sarah, who nodded slightly. Without another word, he grabbed his coat and walked out, brushing past me without so much as an apology. When the door closed, I turned to Sarah, who stood there, arms crossed, tears welling in her eyes. "How long?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Michael, please." "How long, Sarah?" I demanded, louder this time. She looked away, her silence answering more than words ever could. Sarah's silence was deafening. The longer she stood there, unable to meet my eyes, the heavier the betrayal felt, like a stone sinking into my chest. "How long, Sarah?" I asked again, my voice quieter now, tinged with exhaustion. 2 months, she finally whispered. Her voice cracked, and she wiped a tear from her cheek. "It started with the genealogy project. We were just talking about family history, and it got out of hand." "Out of hand," I repeated, letting out a bitter laugh. "You don't accidentally end up in a cabin with another man, Sarah. That takes planning." She flinched at my words but didn't argue. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice shaking. "I never wanted to hurt you." I stared at her, struggling to reconcile the woman standing in front of me with the wife I thought I knew. "You didn't want to hurt me? Sarah, you lied to me. You lied to our kids. And for what? For him." "It wasn't like that," she said quickly, desperation creeping into her tone. "It wasn't about him, it was about me. I felt so lost, Michael. Like I'm just a mom, just a wife. Like I've forgotten who I am." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my temper in check. "And instead of talking to me, you turned to someone else? You let some stranger fill the gaps." Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. I walked to the window, staring out at the dense trees surrounding the cabin. My mind was racing, and my heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. "I gave you everything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I worked long hours, saved for our future, did everything I could to make sure you and the kids were happy. And this is how you repay me." "I'm sorry," she said, stepping closer. "I know I've made a mess of things, but I still love you, Michael." "Ido." "Love me?" I turned to face her, my anger bubbling to the surface. "Don't say that. Don't insult me by pretending you love me while sneaking off to be with him." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse. "I made a mistake," she said. "I let things go too far. But it doesn't mean I don't love you. I want to fix this. I want to fix us." Her words hung in the air, and for a fleeting second, I almost believed her. But the image of her with Caleb, laughing, touching, lying, was burned into my mind. "I don't know if there's anything left to fix," I said, my voice flat. "You made your choice, Sarah. Now I have to make mine." "Michael, please," she begged, reaching for my hand. "Think about Ethan and Olivia. Think about everything we've built together. Don't throw it all away." I pulled my hand away, the weight of her touch too much to bear. "I didn't throw it away, Sarah. You did." Her sobs filled the room as I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. I couldn't stay there any longer. I needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out what came next. The drive home was a blur. The twisting mountain roads might as well have been straight lines for all I noticed. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. But the ache in my chest far outweighed the physical strain. The cabin, Sarah, and Caleb. It all replayed in my mind on a relentless loop. Her laughter, the way she avoided my gaze, her quiet confession of 2 months. 2 months of deceit. I thought about Ethan and Olivia. What would I even tell them? How do you explain to 2 innocent kids that the foundation of their family is cracking apart? By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house looked unfamiliar. This was the place we had built together, filled with years of memories. Now it felt like a hollow shell, a stage where we'd all been playing parts in a script I didn't even know existed. When I stepped inside, the house was eerily quiet. My sister, Anne, had come to watch the kids, and the sight of her sitting on the couch jolted me out of my daze. "Hey," she said softly, standing as soon as she saw me. "How'd it go?" I didn't answer right away. My voice felt trapped somewhere deep inside, tangled up with the emotions I couldn't quite name. Anne's eyes narrowed as she studied me. That bad? She's been lying to me? I said finally, my voice flat. For months. Anne's face fell, and she shook her head. I'm so sorry, Mike. Do you want me to stay? I shook my head.
No.
I've got it from here. Thanks for watching them. She gave me a long hug, the kind only an older sibling can give, and whispered, call me if you need anything. Then she left, leaving me alone with the silence. I checked on the kids before anything else. Ethan was sprawled across his bed, clutching his favorite soccer ball like it was a lifeline. Olivia's curls peeked out from beneath her blanket, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. They looked so peaceful, so untouched by the chaos that had been brewing beneath the surface. For a moment, I envied their innocence. But that peace wouldn't last. Not when the truth came out. Back in the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat at the table. The drink burned my throat, but it didn't do much to dull the ache in my chest. I thought about the life I thought we had, the one I'd worked so hard to build, and I wondered if there was any way to salvage it. Sarah's words echoed in my mind. I still love you. I want to fix this. Did I want to fix it? Could I? I didn't know. What I did know was that I couldn't make any decisions that night. My thoughts were too scattered, my emotions too raw. I needed clarity, and that was something only time could bring. I set the glass down, leaned back in my chair, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere upstairs, Ethan and Olivia were sleeping soundly. They didn't know their world was on the verge of shattering. I didn't know how, but I promised myself I'd do everything in my power to protect them, even if it meant walking away from the woman I once thought I'd spend forever with. The next morning, I woke early, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the blinds. Sleep had come in fits and starts, broken by the memories of the cabin and Sarah's betrayal. But as much as I wanted to stay buried in the blankets, pretending none of it had happened, I had 2 kids upstairs who needed me to hold it together. I made pancakes just like every Saturday morning, even though the thought of eating made my stomach churn. The smell of syrup must have lured them down because before long, Ethan and Olivia stumbled into the kitchen, still in their pajamas. "Morning, Dad," Olivia chirped, climbing into her seat. Ethan mumbled a groggy hello before slumping over the table, still half asleep. "Morning, you two," I said, forcing a smile. It was in these small moments that I found a shred of comfort. As much as I was hurting, Ethan and Olivia didn't deserve to feel it. Not yet. I was halfway through cleaning up breakfast when the doorbell rang. For a moment I froze. I already knew who it would be. Sarah stood on the porch, looking hesitant. Her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and her face was bare of makeup. She looked like the Sarah I had fallen in love with years ago. Except now, she carried the weight of everything that had happened between us. "Michael," she said softly. "Ethan and Olivia are inside," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. "They've been asking about you." Her eyes filled with tears as she nodded and walked past me into the house. I stayed in the kitchen, giving her time with the kids. I could hear their laughter and chatter from the living room, Sarah's voice blending in like nothing had changed. For a moment it almost felt normal. But normal was a lie now. When she finally came back into the kitchen, her expression was serious. "We need to talk." I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms.
"I'm listening."
She hesitated, glancing toward the living room as if to make sure the kids couldn't hear. "I meant what I said, Michael. I want to fix this. I want to fix us." I stared at her, searching her face for some sign of the woman I used to know. "You want to fix this?" I repeated. "Do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just hurt me, Sarah. You broke my trust. You lied to me. You lied to our kids." "I know," she said, her voice trembling, "and I hate myself for it. But I'm asking you, begging you, for a chance to make it right." "Why?" I asked bluntly. "Why now? Why not before you ran off to some cabin with him?" Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw real regret in her eyes. "Because I was selfish," she admitted. "I was stupid. I thought I needed something more, but the second I saw you at the cabin, I realized I already had everything I needed. Her words hit me like a sucker punch. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she could see what she had nearly thrown away. But I couldn't ignore the nagging voice in the back of my mind, telling me it might already be too late. I don't know if I can do this, Sarah, I said quietly. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. She stepped closer, her voice soft and pleading. Michael, please. I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, whatever you want. Just don't give up on us. Don't give up on our family. I didn't respond right away. Couldn't. Instead, I turned away, staring out the window as my thoughts churned. The room felt heavy with silence as Sarah waited for my response. I didn't turn around to face her. Couldn't. Instead, I stared out the window, watching Ethan and Olivia chase each other across the yard. Their laughter a cruel reminder of what was at stake. Michael, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Please say something. What do you want me to say? I asked, my tone flat. That it's okay? That we can just pick up the pieces and pretend this never happened? No, she admitted. I know it's not that simple, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it right. Her words sounded sincere, but sincerity felt like a cheap currency now. You say you're willing to fix this, I said, finally turning to face her. But you weren't willing to stop it from happening in the first place. She winced, and for a moment, I thought she might break down. But instead, she straightened her shoulders and looked me in the eye. You're right. I didn't stop it. I let things spiral out of control, and I have no excuse for that. But I can't change what I've done. All I can do is ask for your forgiveness. Forgiveness. That word hit me like a gut punch. Do you have any idea what you're asking? I said, my voice rising. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed us. You put everything we've built at risk for what? Some fantasy? Some guy who doesn't even belong in our lives. I know, she said, tears streaming down her face. I know I ruined everything. But Michael, I love you. I love our family. And I can't imagine my life without you. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Funny how that works. You didn't seem to think about any of that while you were sneaking off with him. Her sobs filled the room, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered the cabin, the lies, the months of deception. Any sympathy I might have felt was buried beneath the weight of my anger. What about the kids? I asked, my voice quieter now. What do we tell them? How do we explain why Mommy and Daddy don't love each other anymore? Don't say that, she said, her voice breaking. Please, Michael, don't say that we don't love each other. I do love you. I shook my head, the words feeling like ashes in my mouth. Love isn't supposed to feel like this, Sarah. It's not supposed to hurt this much. The sound of the kids' laughter drifted in from the yard, grounding me in the moment. As much as I wanted to walk away, to throw up my hands and say I was done, I couldn't ignore the two little lives depending on us. I need time, I said finally, my voice barely audible. Sarah blinked, startled. Time? I don't know what to do, I admitted. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, but I can't make that decision right now. So I need time to figure it out. To figure out if there's anything left to save. Her face crumpled, and she nodded slowly. Take as much time as you need, she said. I'll wait. As she left the kitchen to gather her things, I slumped into a chair, my head in my hands. The weight of the decision ahead was suffocating, but for now, all I could do was take it one moment at a time. The days that followed felt like I was living in a haze, the kind where you go through the motions but nothing really sinks in. Sarah moved back in, not because I invited her to, but because it was easier for the kids. They didn't know about the storm raging beneath the surface, and for their sake, I tried to keep it that way. Sarah was careful, almost like a ghost in her own home. She tiptoed around me, speaking only when necessary, her usual spark replaced with a subdued version of herself. Part of me wanted to find relief in her discomfort, wanted her to feel the pain she'd caused me. But another part of me just felt hollow. One night, I sat in Ethan's room, helping him with a school project on dinosaurs. Olivia had already fallen asleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit, and the quiet hum of the house was almost peaceful. "Dad?" Ethan said, looking up from his drawings. "Is everything okay with you and Mom?" I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "What makes you ask that?" He shrugged, his little brow furrowing in concentration. "You don't talk to her as much anymore, and you don't smile like you used to." I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to find the right words. "Mom and I are working through some things," I said carefully. "But we both love you and Olivia very much. That's never going to change." Ethan nodded, satisfied with the answer, but his question lingered long after he'd gone to bed. Later that evening, Sarah knocked softly on the door to our bedroom. "Can I come in?" she asked hesitantly. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands fidgeting nervously. "I talked to a counselor today," she said. "I made an appointment for next week. I thought, maybe you'd want to come with me." I stared at her, trying to gauge her sincerity. "What's the point, Sarah? Are we just going to sit there while you say you're sorry and I pretend it makes a difference?" "No," she said, her voice firm. "The point is to try to fix what's broken. I know I can't undo what I did, Michael, but I can show you that I'm willing to fight for us, for our family." Her words stirred something inside me, something fragile and uncertain, but still alive. "I'll think about it," I said finally, my tone softer than I intended. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I realized how exhausted I was. Not just physically, but emotionally. I was tired of the anger, the resentment, the constant replay of what I'd seen at the cabin. But I wasn't ready to let go of those feelings. Not yet. The next morning, as I left for work, Sarah handed me a small envelope. "Just read this when you have a chance," she said quietly. I stuffed it into my briefcase without a word, unsure if I even wanted to know what it said. The envelope sat untouched in my briefcase for the better part of the day. Every time I reached for a document or my laptop, my fingers brushed against it, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. Part of me didn't want to know what Sarah had written. Words wouldn't change what she'd done. By the time I left work and sat in my car, the letter felt like a stone weighing down my bag. The drive home seemed longer than usual, my thoughts circling the unopened envelope like vultures over prey. Finally, parked in the driveway, I reached for it. I tore the seal with shaky hands, unfolded the paper, and began to read. "Michael, I know I don't deserve your time or your patience, but I need to say this anyway. I need you to know that what I did wasn't about you or our family. It was about me, about my own weaknesses and my own selfishness. I've spent these past few days trying to figure out how I could let myself betray the people I love most in the world. And the truth is, I still don't have an answer. But I do know one thing. I love you. I love our children. And losing you, losing us, is my worst fear. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But I want to fight for us, Michael. I want to earn back the trust one destroyed, no matter how long it takes. I know I've given you every reason to walk away, but I'm asking you to stay. Not for my sake, but for Ethan and Olivia, for the family we built together. They deserve to see us try. I'm sorry for all of it. For every lie, every choice that hurt you. I'll carry this guilt with me for the rest of my life. But if you'll let me, I'll spend that life trying to make things right. Sarah." The letter blurred as I stared at the words, my eyes filling with tears I hadn't realized I was holding back. I wanted to be angry, to crumple the paper and toss it aside. But the pain in her words mirrored my own, and for the first time, I saw just how deeply she was grappling with her mistakes. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. When I walked into the house, Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through a magazine but clearly not reading it. She glanced up when I entered, her expression guarded, as if bracing herself for whatever reaction I might have. "I read it," I said simply. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't speak. "I still don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice steady but strained. "But I think I'm willing to try. For the kids." Relief washed over her face, and for a moment, she looked like the Sarah I had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "But this doesn't mean I've forgiven you," I added, my tone firm. "This is going to take time, maybe more time than either of us wants to admit. And if I feel like it's not working, I understand," she said quickly. "Thank you, Michael. I'll do whatever it takes." That night, as I tucked Ethan and Olivia into bed, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. It was faint, barely there, but it was enough to keep me from giving up entirely. The days that followed were tentative, like walking on cracked ice. I didn't know which step might plunge us into freezing waters or if we'd make it to solid ground. Sarah and I kept our conversations focused on the kids and practicalities: school drop-offs, grocery lists, bills. It was a fragile truce, unspoken but necessary. Then came the first counseling session. I wasn't sure what to expect as we sat in the softly lit office of Dr. Ellen Harding. She was an older woman with kind eyes and a calm demeanor that made you feel like nothing was beyond repair. "So," Dr. Harding said, folding her hands in her lap, "what brings you here today?" Sarah glanced at me nervously, but I kept my gaze fixed on the floor. I made a mistake," Sarah began, her voice trembling. "A terrible mistake. And I'm trying to figure out how to make things right. How to save my marriage, if it can even be saved." Dr. Harding nodded, her expression unreadable. "And you, Michael? What do you want from this process?" I took a deep breath, finally lifting my eyes to meet hers. "I want to understand if there's anything left to save. And if there is, how to rebuild something that feels completely broken." The session was emotionally grueling. Sarah spoke about her feelings of emptiness, of losing herself in the routine of motherhood and marriage. She admitted that turning to Caleb was a selfish escape from her own unhappiness. Hearing her say those things out loud was like reopening a wound I'd barely managed to close. But at the same time, it gave me clarity. Her choices weren't about me. They were about her own struggles, her own failures. That didn't excuse them, but it made them less personal in a strange way. Dr. Harding encouraged us to take small steps: daily check-ins, honest communication, and setting boundaries for the process. It felt daunting, but for the first time, there was a roadmap, however faint. At home, things didn't magically improve overnight. Trust doesn't come back just because someone says they're sorry. But Sarah made an effort, and I noticed it. She put her laptop away during family time, joined us for movie nights, and even started singing to the kids again at bedtime. One evening, as she sang softly to Olivia, I stood in the doorway watching her. For a moment, I saw the Sarah I'd married, the woman who had once been my everything. And then Olivia, half asleep, murmured, "Mommy, you make everything better." The words hit me harder than I expected, and I had to step away before Sarah saw the tears threatening to spill over. Months passed, and while the road was far from smooth, we kept walking it together. There were still moments of anger, of doubt, but there were also moments of connection, small glimpses of what we used to be. One night, after the kids were asleep, Sarah and I sat on the porch together, wrapped in blankets against the chill. She reached for my hand, and for the first time in months, I didn't pull away. "I know I don't deserve this," she said quietly, "but thank you for giving me a chance." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked up at the stars, wondering if forgiveness was truly possible. "I'm not there yet," I said finally, "but I'm trying. That's all I can ask," she whispered, her fingers tightening around mine. Maybe we wouldn't make it. Maybe the damage was too great. But for now, we were still standing, still trying. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. If you like our content, leave a like and subscribe for more videos.